This is the story of how Jack, a 65-year-old retired cop, sets out on his long-awaited cruise on the Celebrity Edge, sailing from Barcelona, Marseille, Florence, Rome, Naples, Palermo, Malta. He's counting on a peaceful vacation, but when a mysterious disappearance happens on board, Jack can't resist his old detective instincts. He gets pulled into an investigation even though he promised himself not to get involved. Jack stood on the upper deck, watching Barcelona slowly drift away, like an old postcard someone lazily tossed into the box of memories. In his hand was a glass of red wine, light, tart, the kind that immediately reminded him of southern sunshine and the fact that he wasn't on duty anymore. "Well, Jack, a well-earned vacation deserves a well-earned glass," he muttered to himself, smiling. He felt good. Even the sea air, smelling of salty spray and something sharp, made it clear. Here it is, the start of a new chapter after 65. He slowly surveyed the ship. The Celebrity Edge was a real beauty. 16 decks, every corner sparkling and shining, as if she'd just come off the shipyard. In his head, the old cop grumbled, a voice that was never easy to kick out. "Now this is luxury. When I was young, vacation meant a tent by the lake and mosquitoes, not a spa and a captain's dinner in a tux." Jack smirked and took another sip. Sure, now he finally had a chance to learn how to relax, at least a little. But as soon as Jack headed to the deck bar for another drink, his gaze snagged on a man in a light jacket sitting in the corner. The guy wasn't just relaxing, he was observing. His eyes moved over the passengers slowly, almost mechanically, but with such attention that Jack felt that old tension inside. Cop instinct. Jack pretended to adjust the thin nautical bracelet on his wrist, a gift from his late wife, his favorite thing, and the perfect excuse to look away. "Jack, old man, you came here to relax, not to eavesdrop on tourists. You're off the clock," he scolded himself and turned away. But the unease didn't let go. Back in his cabin, the ship was already at full speed. It was getting dark outside, stars up high, and the ship was gently humming like a satisfied cat. Jack took off his shoes, stretched out on the bed, and let his thoughts wander. "Well, Jack, the first day went almost perfectly." "Almost," he muttered, remembering the man in the jacket. That calm stare, those steady movements. A familiar type, not the kind you see by the pool. Jack rolled onto his side and looked at his suitcase. Under the shirts was his old notebook, the one he used to take case notes in. No, he chuckled to himself. "You promised. No investigations, just wine and sightseeing." He closed his eyes, smiling. The wind whistled outside. The ship rocked gently on the waves, and Jack thought, maybe it's just fatigue, or the habit of seeing trouble where there isn't any. He almost believed himself, until in the moonlight outside, he glimpsed a tall figure walking the deck. Jack winced. "Well, old man, ready to relax?" he said to himself, already knowing relaxing wasn't in the cards. The next morning, Jack woke up early, as always. No soft ship mattress or soothing wave noise could break that habit. He stretched, yawned, and smiled to himself. "Well, old man, even when you're on a cruise ship with 1,000 tourists, you still get up at 6, like there's a morning briefing waiting for you." Jack got up slowly, found his comfy sneakers, and headed out on deck, breathing in the cool sea air. All day, he kept reminding himself of that one promise. Don't get involved. Just relax. Over the years, he'd caught criminals, heard every kind of lie, looked into the eyes of people who wore masks, and all of it had left its mark. When he retired, his wife told him, "Jack, promise me that when you finally get free, you'll learn to just live." He'd promised. Now every glass of wine, every random smile from another passenger, every stroll on the sunlit decks reminded him, learn to let go. Learn to relax, old man. But by the second day, that promise started to crack. At breakfast, surrounded by the smell of coffee and fresh pastries, Jack overheard two women whispering at the next table. "Did you hear? She never came back to her cabin." Come on, maybe she just stayed out late? They say her things are still there, but she's missing. Jack frowned. He pretended to study the menu, but his ear caught every word. Who? When? Why? Later, walking the ship, he noticed odd things. Waiters, usually laid back, were exchanging worried glances, and a cleaning lady, meeting his eyes, quickly looked away. Jack felt that familiar tingle under his skin, like when you step into a room and know something's off, but can't yet say what it is. Well, Jack, he muttered to himself, you promised. But hell, you also promised to be yourself. He tried to brush it off, blaming it all on shipboard rumors. Disappearances, mysteries, drama. Cruise ships love to exaggerate. Maybe the woman had a lover and was hiding in another cabin, or just wanted to disappear for a bit. But those glances, that swarm of whispers, they wouldn't let him be. That evening he sat in the bar, slowly sipping his wine, but his mind kept circling back to the same question. Why hadn't the captain said anything? Why hadn't the crew mentioned a thing? Why did everyone look like they knew more than they were letting on? When the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the ship rocked gently on the waves, Jack stopped pretending. He put on his light jacket, adjusted the old nautical bracelet, and left the cabin. The empty corridors echoed with his footsteps, night lights reflecting in the polished metal. He walked slowly, as if returning to a past where the night was an ally and silence his best partner. Well, old man, he said softly, if you can't sleep anyway, why not take a walk? Unofficially. Just reconnaissance, you know, for the soul. With that thought, he stepped out onto the empty deck, ready for whatever surprises the night might bring. The night deck greeted Jack with the rustle of waves and the occasional flash from distant lighthouses. He walked quietly, almost noiselessly, a habit formed over years on the job. Yes, Jack, that's called professional deformation, he smirked to himself. All you wanted was a little stroll, and here you are, sneaking around like you're tailing a suspect. He sighed and kept moving, watching the rare figures on deck. A couple hiding in the shadows, a security guard lazily checking the railings, and 2 crew members in uniform huddled by a side exit. Jack was about to walk past when he slowed down. Their whispered conversation caught his ear. I'm telling you it's weird, one whispered, glancing around nervously. First the captain says, keep it all quiet. Now she's disappeared, and still nothing's announced. Yeah, but you know, the other replied, panic on board is the worst thing that could happen. We just have to do our jobs. Jack leaned in a little, barely holding back a sarcastic grin. So that's how it is, he thought. There's a disappearance, but no alarm. Brilliant plan, Captain. The passengers keep sipping champagne, while someone might already be overboard. He eased away, careful not to attract attention. Inside, everything tightened, that old cop instinct screaming for action. But Jack knew better. This wasn't the time to dive in. He needed facts. First question, who exactly are they looking for? He headed a few decks down toward the library, a quiet, secluded corner on this massive ship. It was always peaceful there, with the scent of books and a hint of dust, rows of computers, and, if you were lucky, maybe access to ship schedules or even the guest list. Yeah, Jack, he muttered as he stepped into the dim room. Just a retired guy looking for a good read, like, say, the list of every passenger on this giant cruise ship. He ran his hand over the table, feeling its cool surface, glanced at the soft chairs and neatly lined up shelves. Suddenly, his wife's words floated through his mind. Jack, you're always looking for an answer, even when there's no question yet. He smiled. Maybe she was right, but tonight, he definitely had a question. Outside, the ship rocked gently on the waves, and the lighthouse glow faded behind the horizon. Jack sat at the nearest computer, wondering where to begin. Well, old man, he said to himself, looks like you really don't know how to relax, and this might just be your biggest adventure yet. Jack ran his hand along the spines of the books on the library shelves. The air smelled faintly of dust, old paper, and something wonderfully cozy, as if the room itself knew that here you should whisper, not speak out loud. That's what I've always missed, he thought with a soft smile. Silence. Real, honest-to-goodness silence that doesn't make you nervous, just calms you down. He sank into an armchair by the window, reached for his notebook, and realized his heart was beating faster than usual. Well, old Jack, no wonder. 20 years chasing suspects, and all it takes is a missing person and you're back in the game. He thought about old cases. They always started out as something random. Someone didn't show up for work. Someone left their car running. Someone skipped a family dinner. And almost always it turned out to be more than just forgetfulness. There are fewer coincidences in this world than you think, Jack reminded himself. But people who love keeping secrets, there's never a shortage of those. He pulled out his battered old notebook and started jotting down notes. Who was near that strange figure in the light jacket? Who was hanging out at the bar, sneaking glances? Who was whispering to the waiters? He sorted through faces, movements, throwaway comments. Everything his cop's memory tended to latch onto. His gut told him, put enough pieces together and the picture would start to form. He frowned, set the pen aside, and stared out at the starry sky. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, he thought. Maybe all of this is just me, seeing conspiracies where there aren't any? But then he shook his head. No, that feeling in his gut. He knew it too well, and he was rarely wrong. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind him, and Jack startled a little. He turned. A woman entered the library. Slender silver hair, light scarf, book in hand. She glanced at him quickly and smiled a little. Jack automatically smiled back. She walked over to the shelves, as if picking out a book, then turned around. Have you noticed things feel tense on board? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack raised an eyebrow, his heart skipping again. And aren't you watching strangers a little too closely yourself, ma'am? He said with a wry smile, hiding his surprise. She shrugged, took a step closer, and held out her hand. Sylvia, and for the record, I'm just a very good listener. Jack, he replied, shaking her hand. And let's just say, I used to be a professional listener. Sylvia chuckled, giving him a sideways look. Well then, we'll have plenty to talk about. And right then, he felt it. That weird sense that random people sometimes end up in exactly the story they've been missing. Jack smiled to himself. Well, old man, looks like you just found yourself a partner. Jack and Sylvia sat in the corner of the library like two schoolkids plotting a prank that the adults hadn't discovered yet. His battered notebook lay between them on the table, and he kept jotting down notes. Sylvia would laugh, then lean in closer, as if afraid someone might overhear, even though the place was empty. I saw her cabin, she said softly, raising her teacup to her lips. At night, when I was passing by, I saw someone go in, a tall man, light jacket. Jack raised his eyebrows. A light jacket, you say? Now that's interesting. He grinned, feeling the old cop's excitement spark up inside. Sylvia, my dear, have you ever considered a career in investigations? Sylvia laughed, throwing her head back. You think I'd be any good? Honestly, I just like playing Sherlock Holmes on vacation. But you're the real deal. That much is obvious. Jack leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. His heart was pounding a bit faster than he'd like to admit. Sure, it could have been just a coincidence. Maybe. But everything in his gut told him, coincidences don't happen by accident. You know, Sylvia, he said, standing up, you're wonderful company, but it's time I paid someone a visit up on the bridge. Time to ask what's really going on here. Are you sure the captain's going to be happy about that? She teased, her eyes playful. Jack chuckled. Never met a captain who was glad to see an old cop with a notebook. But sometimes people need a reminder that even on a luxury liner, rules are still rules. He shook her hand, and in that brief touch, he felt something surprisingly warm, almost personal. But this wasn't the time to think about that. Jack left the library and made his way toward the bridge. The ship gently rocked on the waves. The night wind brushed against his skin, and he suddenly caught himself thinking, "You idiot! Promised yourself a break, you really did. And here you are, about to go investigate again." But there was no turning back now. When he reached the captain's office, the door was opened by a tall man in a perfectly pressed uniform. Captain Fabiano, around 50, smiled at him in that way people do when they think you're in the wrong place entirely. "Good evening," the captain said with a soft Italian accent. "I heard you've been asking about recent events on board." Jack narrowed his eyes, a wry smile on his lips. "Well, Captain, shall we swap a little information, or would you rather your amateur sleuth keep playing blind?" The captain greeted Jack with exactly the kind of smile he'd hated his whole life. Polite, measured, but unmistakably saying, "Don't meddle in what's not your business." Fabiano listened to all the questions, nodded gently, thanked Jack for his concern, and, gazing just over his head, assured him that everything was under control. "Mr. Harper, I assure you there's no reason for panic on board," he said with a lazy smile. "Sometimes passengers, well, let's say they enjoy a little privacy. I'm sure you understand." Jack smirked, holding his gaze. "Of course I do. But you know, Captain, in my experience, whenever someone was absolutely sure everything was under control, it usually meant the opposite." The captain nodded dismissively, signaling the conversation was over. Jack stepped back into the corridor, mind already working out a new plan. Fine, if the top brass wouldn't talk, he'd just have to work from below. He spent the whole next day quietly gathering information, strolling the decks, chatting casually with neighbors, tossing out innocent questions. "Have you seen that lady lately? She was sitting there last night, right?" The waiters were especially talkative. They always knew everything about the passengers, who was with whom, who went where, who ordered what, and who disappeared before dessert. Sometimes a simple smile and a kind word opened more doors than a badge ever could. But suddenly, everything went sideways. Chatting with one of the waitresses, a sweet girl named Lorena, he casually mentioned, "That missing lady, Mrs. Warren. No one's seen her since yesterday morning, right?" Lorena raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Oh no, monsieur. She was seen in Marseille. She went ashore that morning with a tour group, and from what I heard, she stayed there. People say she had urgent business." Jack froze. It was like someone flipped a switch in his mind. What? His whole investigation, the neat web of suspicion, suddenly started crumbling like a house of cards. He thanked Lorena, managed a polite smile, and walked away. His heart thudded in his chest. "Well, Harper," he muttered to himself, "did you get all worked up over nothing? Is this just age, paranoia, the old cop instincts finally letting you down? Or is there still something here you're just not seeing?" He walked over to the railings and stared at the endless sea. The feeling inside was strange, a cocktail of relief, frustration, and irony. Picture that, Jack. The man who always thought he was a step ahead, now just a grandpa chasing conspiracies in missing slippers. But deep down, he couldn't let it go. Jack knew this wasn't the end. Jack sat on a bench by the quiet side deck, watching the ship slice gently through the waves. "Well, Harper," he muttered with a smirk, "turns out the missing lady just decided to take an impromptu weekend in Marseille. No mysterious disappearances, no intrigue, no secret agents, just urgent business and bad communication." He sighed, feeling a strange mix of relief and mild annoyance. "So what did you spend 2 days on? Playing detective over nothing? Old man, you really should retire." "Oh wait, you already did." He almost laughed out loud, but just then a familiar voice sounded nearby. "Well, Mr. Detective, how's your grand investigation going?" Jack turned. Sylvia was standing there, arms crossed, wearing that mischievous smile he was starting to like a little more than he probably should. "Oh, I found it all out," he chuckled. "Turns out Mrs. Warren just ran away from all of us. You can call me Sherlock Misunderstanding." Sylvia burst out laughing and sat down beside him. You know, Jack, I'll be honest. I was teasing you on purpose. Wanted to see if you were really a real detective or just liked acting serious. Jack widened his eyes. Wait, you? You knew? She laughed, bright and kind. Didn't know, but I had a hunch, and you needed it. You should have seen your face chasing down waiters with questions. You came alive, Jack. You like it, feeling back in the game. He thought about it, then slowly nodded. Damn, she was right. Sure, he wanted to learn to relax. Sure, he'd promised himself not to meddle anymore. But maybe you just can't turn off the person you've always been. Well then, he said, getting up and holding out his hand. I suggest we celebrate my grand reveal, or my spectacular failure. How about dinner with some wine? Sylvia grinned even wider. Oh, Jack, with that attitude, you'll definitely convince me. They walked together toward the restaurant, laughing and teasing each other. Jack felt it. Yes, the missing lady story turned out to be ordinary, but it was exactly what brought back that spark, that sense of lightness he thought he'd lost forever. And something told him, this evening might turn out more interesting than any mystery. The last dinner on the ship was always special, not because of the food or the music, but because of the atmosphere. People laughed, swapped contact info, talked about where they'd go after the cruise, and reminisced about the best moments. Jack sat at the table with Sylvia, Jim, and Linda from Texas, and a French couple who entertained everyone all evening with their wild stories. Remember when you were running around the decks, Jack? Linda laughed, nudging him with her elbow. I thought, now that is a man who knows how to have fun. Oh yeah, Jack grinned. I think half the crew decided I was an undercover private eye. Next time I'll bring a magnifying glass, just for the part. Everyone burst out laughing again, and Jack realized he hadn't felt this light in ages. It didn't take much wine, good company, laughter, and just knowing you belonged were enough. Sylvia raised her glass, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I want to toast to the fact that the real mysteries aren't disappearances, but meetings, and that the best adventures happen when you least expect them. Jack looked at her and realized this night wasn't just a fun farewell. It was the moment when he, Jack Harper, finally felt like he wasn't just a retired cop, but a man who still had something ahead of him. He raised his own glass. To Sylvia, my dear, to a meeting that was worth all the mysteries on this ship. They clinked glasses, and laughter rippled across the table like a spray of champagne. Later, when the evening was over, and everyone headed for their cabins, Jack stepped out on deck. There, in the early morning haze, he saw the shore coming closer. The sun was just starting to paint the horizon gold, and the ship moved softly, confidently, toward a new day. Jack stood by the rail, thinking, well, Harper, that's the end of the cruise, but who says it's the end of the adventure? He smiled, feeling his heart beating a little stronger than before. Land lay ahead, and who knows, maybe another meeting, another story. Jack stood on the top deck, breathing in the fresh sea air, sharp, cool, alive. He watched the shore draw closer, watched the sunlight dance on the water, and couldn't help but smile. All of it. The ship, the adventure, the new friends, the ridiculous investigation with its unexpectedly warm ending, wove itself into a memory he'd be glad to keep. He ran his fingers over the bracelet on his wrist, the one his wife had given him, and suddenly felt a gentle warmth in his chest. Well, Jack, he thought wryly, turns out you're still able to get into trouble. And you know, that's not such a bad thing. He chuckled quietly, remembering how he'd spent 2 days chasing a mystery that turned out to be a simple misunderstanding. And yet, this wasn't just a vacation. It was a reminder, as long as you're alive, you can stay in the game. When the ship finally docked, passengers headed for the gangway. Suddenly, Jack heard a familiar voice. Jack! He turned. Sylvia stood a little off to the side, waving and smiling that genuine, lively smile that had woken up something in him. "See you again," she called, winking. Jack raised his hand in reply, smiling in a way he hadn't in years. "Yes, Sylvia, we'll see each other again." He stepped ashore, feeling solid ground beneath his feet for the first time in ages, but inside he felt light, almost weightless. And even if his old instincts had led him nowhere this time, they had still brought him back to what mattered most, that life goes on if you're willing to meet it halfway.